The radio crackled at 3:47 hours, somewhere in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan. Static filled the command center as Major Kestrel Storm Alvarez watched 16 green dots disappear from the tactical display. 16 Navy SEALs, gone in the span of 3 heartbeats. The silence that followed wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the suffocating weight of men who knew they were about to die. Their last transmission, a whispered prayer into the void. "Storm, we need immediate close air support at grid November 7-4, came the desperate voice through the interference. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reeves sounded different now, stripped of his usual swagger. The same man who'd questioned her squadron assignment 3 weeks earlier, asking if they'd really sent nursemaids to cover real operators. Now his voice carried the tremor of someone staring into an abyss. The mission had started as routine reconnaissance. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence in the Korangal Valley's eastern approaches. The SEALs were supposed to observe, photograph, and extract. Simple. Clean. Except nothing in Afghanistan was ever simple, and the Taliban had learned to read American patterns better than most Americans could read their own playbooks. Major Alvarez studied the satellite imagery on her heads-up display. Her Thunderbolt II cutting through thin mountain air at 12,000 feet. The canyon below looked like a wound carved into the earth by an angry god, barely 600 feet wide at its mouth, narrowing to less than 300 at the bottleneck where Reeves' team was pinned. Sheer granite walls rose nearly 1,000 feet on either side, creating what pilots called a death funnel. One mistake, one slight miscalculation, and her $30 million aircraft would become expensive confetti scattered across Afghan rocks. "Storm, they've got us in a crossfire from multiple positions," Reeves transmitted, his breathing labored. "We count at least 40 enemy fighters with RPGs and heavy machine guns. Request immediate gun runs on the ridge line." Through her targeting pod, Alvarez could see muzzle flashes winking like deadly stars against the canyon walls. The Taliban had chosen their ambush point perfectly: high ground on 3 sides, escape routes pre-planned, and a killing field so narrow that conventional air support would be suicide. The other pilots in her squadron had already voiced their concerns over the tactical frequency. The canyon was a tomb waiting to claim another American aircraft. But Major Kestrel Alvarez hadn't earned her call sign, Storm, by avoiding bad weather. She'd earned it by flying straight through it, bringing thunder and lightning to those who thought geography could protect them from American resolve. As she banked her A-10 into attack position, she remembered her grandfather's words from 20 years ago. "Mija, sometimes the only way out is through." The canyon walls seemed to reach for her aircraft like grasping fingers as she began her descent into hell. The tactical frequency erupted with chatter as Storm banked her A-10 into the initial approach vector. Her squadron leader, Colonel Marcus Webb, cut through the noise with characteristic authority. "Negative, Storm. I'm calling abort on this run. That canyon's a coffin. We'll find another way to support the ground team." Alvarez's gloved hands remained steady on the controls as she descended through 9,000 feet. Below, the granite walls of the Korangal narrowed like a geological noose. Her aircraft's computer systems screamed warnings, proximity alerts, terrain avoidance systems, everything designed to keep pilots from doing exactly what she was about to attempt. "Storm, acknowledge abort command." Webb's voice carried the weight of 23 years of military aviation. "Sir, with respect, those SEALs don't have time for us to find another way," she replied, her voice calm as mountain lake water. "I can thread this needle." Through her targeting pod, she watched Taliban fighters repositioning along the ridge lines. They'd learned from previous American airstrikes, spreading their forces to minimize casualties while maximizing defensive coverage. Rocket-propelled grenades glinted in the early morning sun, patient and deadly as coiled serpents. "God damn it, Alvarez, that's not a needle, it's a meat grinder," came another voice over the comm. Captain Rick Buzzsaw Morrison, her wingman, pulled his own A-10 into a wide orbit above the canyon mouth. The math doesn't work. Your wingspan's 78 feet. That bottleneck's maybe 300 at the widest point. The numbers were brutal but simple. Her A-10 Thunderbolt II was built for close air support, not aerial acrobatics. Its straight wings and twin engines made it incredibly stable for ground attack missions, but those same characteristics made it about as maneuverable as a flying brick in tight spaces. The Fairchild Republic designers who'd created the Warthog in the 1970s never imagined their aircraft threading mountain canyons in Afghanistan. But Storm had grown up threading needles, first with her grandmother's sewing machine in Albuquerque, then with her father's crop duster over New Mexico farmland, and finally with military aircraft that weren't supposed to do the things she made them do. Every instructor at flight school had told her the same thing. Stick to the manual, follow procedures, don't improvise. She'd graduated at the top of her class by learning when to ignore that advice. "Storm, this is Reeves." The SEAL commander's transmission cut through the debate. Background noise suggested his situation was deteriorating rapidly. Automatic weapons fire, shouted Arabic, the distinctive whine of incoming mortar rounds. "We've got wounded down here. My medic says tours won't last another 10 minutes without immediate evacuation." The silence that followed stretched like a held breath across the tactical frequency. Every pilot in the squadron knew the mathematics of combat triage. 10 minutes to organize a helicopter extraction from a hot landing zone meant 20 minutes minimum. Tours would be dead before the rotors touched Afghan soil. Major Alvarez pushed her throttles forward and dove toward the canyon mouth. Her A-10's twin General Electric engines responded with a throaty roar that echoed off the surrounding peaks. The granite walls rushed past her cockpit windows like a high-speed tunnel as Storm committed to the canyon run. At 450 knots, she had roughly 30 seconds to identify targets, acquire firing solutions, and deliver ordnance before the narrowing walls forced her into a climb that would expose her aircraft to concentrated ground fire. 30 seconds to save 16 American lives. Her heads-up display painted threat indicators across the canyon rim, dozens of heat signatures representing Taliban fighters who'd spent the better part of an hour preparing this killing field. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, creating interlocking fields of fire that would turn any rescue helicopter into burning scrap metal. The only way to break their defensive positions was to get close enough to deliver precision strikes with her GAU-8 Avenger cannon. "Jesus Christ, she's actually doing it." Morrison's voice carried a mixture of admiration and horror as he watched Storm's aircraft disappear into the canyon mouth. The world narrowed to granite and shadows as canyon walls rose on either side of her aircraft. Wind currents, deflected and twisted by the mountain terrain, buffeted her A-10 like an angry giant. Her altitude dropped to less than 200 feet above the canyon floor, low enough to see individual rocks and sparse vegetation clinging to the harsh landscape. "Contact left, multiple muzzle flashes on the north ridge," she called out, her thumb finding the cannon trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger responded with its characteristic buzzing roar, 30mm depleted uranium rounds chewing through Taliban positions at 70 rounds per second. Rock dust and smoke erupted from the impact points as her high-explosive incendiary rounds found their marks. Banking hard right to avoid a protruding rock formation, Storm felt her aircraft shudder as it approached its structural limits. The A-10 had been designed to survive ground fire, not to perform aerobatic maneuvers in confined spaces. Every control input had to be precise. Too aggressive, and she'd stall into the canyon wall. Too gentle, and she'd present an easy target for the RPG teams tracking her flight path. "Storm, I've got eyes on at least 6 RPG teams along the south wall," Reeves transmitted from his concealed position. "They're tracking your approach vector." She could see them now through her targeting pod, green-clad figures with distinctive shoulder-fired weapons, leading her aircraft like hunters tracking a wounded deer. The rocket-propelled grenades were unguided, But in the confines of the canyon, accuracy became less important than volume of fire. A near miss could damage her aircraft enough to turn a controlled flight into an uncontrolled crash. Copy that, Reeves. Keep your heads down, this is going to get loud. Storm rolled her aircraft inverted, using gravity to increase her dive angle toward the Taliban positions. The maneuver was borrowed from her grandfather's crop dusting techniques, adapted for a combat environment where the stakes were measured in American lives rather than agricultural yields. The canyon walls blurred past her inverted cockpit as depleted uranium rounds stitched destruction across the South Ridge. Taliban fighters scattered like startled insects, their coordinated defense dissolving under precision fire from an aircraft that shouldn't have been able to operate in such confined terrain. But threading the canyon was only half the battle. The narrowing walls ahead represented the real test of Storm's flying abilities and her aircraft's structural limits. The bottleneck appeared ahead like a granite doorway to hell, its walls so close that Storm could see individual fractures in the rock face. Her A-10's wingspan of 57 feet, 6 inches would clear the narrowest point by less than 30 feet on each side, a margin that would have been comfortable at altitude but felt suicidal at 200 feet above ground level, with crosswinds gusting to 40 knots. "Storm, you're approaching minimum clearance," Morrison's voice carried across the tactical frequency, tight with tension. From his orbit above the canyon, he could see what she couldn't: Taliban fighters repositioning for clear shots as her aircraft emerged from the bottleneck. The granite walls seemed to reach for her wingtips as she committed to the passage. Wind shear, caused by air currents deflecting off the canyon walls, tried to slam her aircraft into the rock face. Her rudder pedals worked constantly, making minute corrections to keep her flight path centered between the unforgiving stone barriers. Through her targeting pod, she could see Reeves' team huddled in a depression near the canyon floor. Sergeant First Class Miguel Torres lay motionless, while the team medic worked frantically over his still form. The other SEALs had formed a defensive perimeter, their M4 carbines spitting return fire at Taliban positions that seemed to multiply like deadly mushrooms on every available ledge and outcropping. "Storm, Torres is going into shock," the medic's voice cut through the radio chatter. "I need that medevac bird in here now, or we're going to lose him." But first, she had to clear the remaining Taliban positions that would turn any helicopter insertion into a death trap. Her cannon had already expended 600 rounds, leaving her with enough ammunition for perhaps 2 more sustained bursts. Every round had to count. Banking left to align with a cluster of heat signatures on the north wall, Storm felt her aircraft slide sideways as crosswinds caught her control surfaces. For a terrifying moment, her left wingtip tracked directly toward a granite outcropping that would have sheared it off like a knife through aluminum foil. Only a desperate application of right rudder and aileron saved her from becoming another statistic in the long list of aircraft lost to Afghan mountains. "Contact eliminated, north wall," she reported as her cannon rounds obliterated another RPG team. The Avengers' depleted uranium penetrators punched through the Taliban fighters' improvised rock fortifications like they were constructed from cardboard rather than mountain stone. The canyon began to widen slightly as she approached the eastern outlet, but the tactical situation remained critical. Intelligence estimates suggested at least 20 enemy fighters remained active, and her fuel state was becoming a factor. The A-10's impressive loiter time meant nothing when flying at full throttle through mountain canyons. "Storm, this is Reeves. I count 4 more RPG teams on the rim eastern approach. They're waiting for you to clear the canyon." It was a classic Taliban tactic: allow the aircraft to complete its attack run, then engage it as it climbed away from the target area. The RPG teams would have clear shots as her A-10 gained altitude, and the relatively slow speed of her aircraft would make her an ideal target for the unguided rockets. But Major Kestrel Alvarez hadn't earned her reputation by avoiding tactical challenges. As the canyon walls began to fall away, she prepared for the most dangerous phase of her attack run. Instead of climbing away from the canyon as the Taliban fighters expected, Storm pulled her A-10 into a knife-edge maneuver that would have made aerobatic display pilots nervous. Rolling 90 degrees to starboard, she used the canyon's eastern wall as partial concealment while acquiring targeting solutions on the waiting RPG teams. The maneuver was borrowed from her teenage years, flying her father's modified P-51 Mustang at air shows throughout the Southwest. Elena Alvarez had been the only 16-year-old girl certified to fly World War II warbirds in exhibition, a fact that had impressed flight school instructors far less than it should have. Military aviation, they'd explained patiently, rewarded consistency over creativity. "Holy shit, she's flying sideways," Morrison's voice carried across the tactical frequency as he watched Storm's aircraft track along the canyon wall like some impossible fusion of airplane and mountain goat. Her targeting pod painted laser designations on 4 separate heat signatures spread across the eastern rim. The RPG teams had positioned themselves for clear shots at climbing aircraft, not for sideways approaches that turned her A-10 into a flying gun platform with the canyon wall as backdrop. "Storm, you're pulling GS that aircraft wasn't designed for," Colonel Webb's voice carried genuine concern alongside his command authority. "Your structural limits are suggestions, not absolutes," she replied, triggering another burst from her GAU-8. The recoil from 30mm rounds pushed against her aircraft's forward momentum, requiring constant throttle adjustments to maintain airspeed and attitude control. The first RPG team disappeared in a cloud of rock dust and high-explosive fragments. The second tried to traverse their weapon to track her unexpected approach angle, but depleted uranium rounds found them before they could complete the movement. By the time the third and fourth teams realized their tactical situation had changed, Storm's cannon had already written their obituaries in 30mm script. "All RPG teams neutralized, eastern approach," she reported, pulling her aircraft level as the canyon finally released its granite grip. "Reeves, you should be clear for helicopter extraction." But even as she spoke, her threat warning systems began painting new contacts. The Taliban had committed reinforcements to the engagement, and the sound of American aircraft operations had drawn attention from across the Korangal Valley. What had started as a routine patrol extraction was evolving into something much larger and more dangerous. "Storm, this is Overlord," came a new voice over the command frequency. Major General Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of Combined Joint Task Force Phoenix, had been monitoring the engagement from Bagram Air Base. "Satellite imagery shows multiple enemy convoys converging on your position. We're looking at possibly 200 enemy fighters within the next 30 minutes. The mathematics of the situation were becoming increasingly unfavorable. 16 SEALs, one seriously wounded, trapped in a canyon that had become the focal point for every Taliban fighter within 20 miles. The helicopter extraction would require at least 15 minutes from wheels up to extraction complete, and Storm's A-10 squadron lacked the ordnance to suppress 200 enemy fighters spread across multiple square miles of mountain terrain. "Overlord, recommend immediate priority medevac for tours," Storm replied, climbing to 8,000 feet to survey the tactical situation. "Ground team can hold position until additional close air support arrives." Through her targeting pod, she could see dust clouds rising from multiple approach routes as Taliban reinforcements converged on the canyon. Technical vehicles mounted with heavy machine guns, motorcycles carrying RPG teams, and dismounted infantry moving through terrain that favored defenders over attackers. The enemy was committing significant resources to eliminate the trapped American team, suggesting intelligence value far beyond a routine reconnaissance patrol. "Negative on additional CAS." General Hayes' voice carried the weight of strategic considerations that extended beyond the immediate tactical situation. All available aircraft are committed to operations in Helmand Province. You're going to have to make do with what you have. What she had was a single A-10 with perhaps 400 rounds of 30mm ammunition, two AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles intended for air-to-air engagement, and fuel for maybe 45 more minutes of combat operations. Against 200 enemy fighters in defensive terrain, those resources would last about as long as morning dew in the Afghan sun. But as Storm banked her aircraft toward the approaching Taliban convoys, she remembered something her flight instructor had told her during advanced tactical training. The enemy gets a vote in every engagement, but they don't get to write the entire battle plan. It was time to show the Taliban that sometimes one pilot with the right aircraft could rewrite the mathematics of warfare, even when the numbers suggested inevitable defeat. The dust clouds from approaching Taliban reinforcements stretched across the Korangal Valley like brown scars against the landscape, as Storm assessed her tactical options. 200 enemy fighters represented more targets than her remaining ordnance could address, but the Taliban had made a critical error in their response to the trapped American patrol. By committing so many resources to a single engagement, they'd created what military strategists called a target-rich environment. The same concentration of forces that made them dangerous also made them vulnerable to coordinated air attacks. The problem was coordination. Storm's A-10 squadron consisted of exactly one operational aircraft in position to influence the engagement. "Reeves, I need you to paint targets with your laser designator," she transmitted to the SEAL team leader. "Priority goes to anything that looks like it can shoot down a helicopter." The response crackled back immediately. "Roger that, Storm. We've got eyes on multiple technical vehicles with mounted weapons, approximately 3 clicks northeast of our position. I'm painting the lead vehicle now." Through her targeting pod, Storm could see the infrared laser designation marking a Toyota pickup truck mounting what appeared to be a Soviet-era Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. The twin-barrel 23mm system could shred a medical evacuation helicopter like tissue paper, turning any rescue attempt into a death sentence for both the aircrew and the trapped SEALs. Her first Maverick missile streaked away from her aircraft with a contrail of white smoke, tracking the laser designation with electronic precision. The high-explosive warhead detonated directly beneath the technical vehicle, lifting the truck and its mounted weapon into the air in a spectacular fireball that sent Taliban fighters diving for cover across a 100-meter radius. "Target destroyed," she reported, already acquiring her second missile solution. "Reeves, give me another paint job." But as her second Maverick eliminated another anti-aircraft position, Storm realized that destroying individual targets was a losing strategy. The Taliban reinforcements were arriving faster than she could eliminate them, and each missile expended brought her closer to a situation where she'd be defenseless against the growing enemy force. What she needed was a force multiplier, something that would turn her limited ordnance into maximum tactical effect. The answer came from an unexpected source: her grandfather's stories about crop dusting in the 1960s, when a single aircraft could treat thousands of acres by understanding wind patterns and chemical dispersal. The Taliban had positioned their forces along predictable routes, mountain roads, valley floors, and ridgelines that offered good fields of fire toward the canyon where the SEALs were trapped. They'd followed sound tactical doctrine, but doctrine could become predictable, and predictability could become vulnerability. "Morrison, I need you to make gun runs on the northern ridgeline," she transmitted to her wingman. "Don't worry about precision. I want noise, smoke, and confusion. Make them think we're committing our entire squadron to this engagement." "Storm, I'm still 15 miles out," Morrison replied. "I can be on station in 8 minutes." 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours given the speed of Taliban reinforcement. But Storm had learned patience from her grandmother, who taught her that sometimes the best solution required waiting for exactly the right moment to act. Copy that. When you arrive, I want sustained gun runs across the northern approaches. Draw their attention while I work the southern routes. It was a classic aviation tactic called hammer and anvil. One aircraft fixing the enemy's attention while another struck from an unexpected direction. But executing it with only two A-10s against dispersed ground forces required timing, communication, and a significant amount of luck. Through her cockpit windows, Storm could see the medical evacuation helicopter approaching from the southeast, its distinctive silhouette marking it as a A-60 Black Hawk configured for casualty evacuation. The aircrew would need at least 10 minutes to extract Torres and the rest of Reeves' team, 10 minutes during which the helicopter would be completely vulnerable to ground fire from the surrounding mountain positions. The Taliban commanders had evidently reached the same tactical conclusion. Storm's targeting pod detected increased movement along all the approach routes as enemy fighters repositioned for clear shots at the extraction site. What had started as an ambush was evolving into a deliberate attempt to shoot down American aircraft, a propaganda victory that would resonate throughout the region. But as the enemy forces repositioned, they created exactly the opportunity Storm had been waiting for. Military tacticians called it tactical overextension, the moment when an enemy force commits so completely to a single objective that it becomes vulnerable to unexpected counterattacks. Storm rolled her A-10 into a steep dive toward the largest concentration of Taliban vehicles, her remaining cannon rounds chambered and ready. She had perhaps 200 rounds of 30mm ammunition left, enough for one sustained burst that would either break the enemy formation or leave her defenseless against 200 armed fighters. As the desert floor rushed toward her aircraft, Storm keyed her radio one final time. "All stations, this is Storm. I'm going Winchester on this pass. If it doesn't work, Torres and his team are going to need a miracle." The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with its signature buzzsaw roar as Storm committed every remaining round to a single, devastating gun run that would determine the fate of 16 American servicemen trapped in an Afghan canyon. The sound of 30mm depleted uranium rounds impacting Taliban positions echoed across the Korangal Valley like thunder rolling through mountain peaks. Storm's gun runs stitched destruction across the enemy formation with surgical precision, each burst guided by years of combat experience and an intuitive understanding of how aircraft weapon systems performed in mountain terrain. Her targeting computer painted impact points across the convoy of technical vehicles, but Storm was flying by instinct now, adjusting her aim point based on visual cues rather than electronic systems. The Taliban fighters had learned to disperse when American aircraft appeared, but dispersal took time, and time was something they didn't have as 200 pounds of high-explosive 30mm rounds walked through their formation. "Jesus, Storm, you just turned 20 vehicles into scrap metal." Morrison's voice carried amazement as he watched the engagement from his approach vector. Smoke columns rose from the valley floor like funeral pyres, marking the locations where Taliban reinforcements had been moments before. But the gun run had a cost beyond expended ammunition. Storm's A-10 was now Winchester, military terminology for completely out of ordnance. She retained her two AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, but those were designed for air-to-air engagement against aircraft, not ground targets. For practical purposes, her aircraft had been transformed from a flying gun platform into an expensive observation post. "Dust off 7-3, this is Storm," she transmitted to the approaching medical evacuation helicopter. "I've cleared the immediate landing zone, but you're going to have company. Multiple enemy fighters are still active in the surrounding hills." The Black Hawk pilot's response crackled back immediately. "Roger that, Storm. We're committed to this extraction. Torres needs immediate surgical intervention, or he's not going to make it back to Bagram." Through her targeting pod, Storm could see the medical helicopter beginning its descent toward the narrow valley floor where Reeves' team waited. The aircraft was completely exposed during the approach, vulnerable to small arms fire from dozens of concealed positions that her gun run hadn't been able to address. "Reeves, I need your team to provide suppressing fire on any positions that engage the helicopter," she instructed. "I'll try to draw attention with low passes, but I'm out of ordnance." "Copy that, Storm. My boys are ready." What followed was a demonstration of tactical cooperation that would be studied in military academies for decades afterward. As the medical helicopter descended into the valley, Storm flew her A-10 in aggressive low passes, designed to present the most obvious target for Taliban fighters still concealed in the surrounding terrain. The tactic worked exactly as intended. Enemy fighters, conditioned by months of combat experience to engage American aircraft whenever possible, revealed their positions by firing at Storm's A-10 as it passed overhead. The muzzle flashes gave away their locations to Reeves' team, who responded with precision rifle fire that eliminated the threats before they could engage the vulnerable helicopter. "Taking fire from multiple positions," the Black Hawk pilot reported as his aircraft flared for landing. "I count at least 6 active shooters on the northern ridge." "I've got them," Reeves responded, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding his team's position. "Storms drawing their fire, we're taking them down as they expose themselves." It was a deadly game of tactical chess played at lethal speeds. Storm's A-10 served as bait, drawing enemy fire and revealing Taliban positions. The SEALs eliminated the revealed threats with precision shooting. The medical helicopter used the suppressed zone to complete its extraction mission. But the game couldn't continue indefinitely. Storm's fuel gauge indicated 20 minutes of flight time remaining, and Morrison's aircraft was still 5 minutes away. Once she was forced to climb away from the valley to conserve fuel, the tactical balance would shift dramatically in favor of the Taliban forces. "Dustoff 7-3, how long do you need for extraction?" she asked. 6 minutes for patient transfer, another 2 minutes for takeoff and initial climb," came the response. "We're going to be vulnerable for at least 8 minutes total." 8 minutes was longer than Storm could maintain her current tactics. Her fuel state required a climb to more efficient altitude within the next 5 minutes, and her complete lack of ordnance meant she couldn't suppress enemy positions that would emerge once her aircraft was no longer an immediate threat. The solution came from Morrison's arrival on station. Her wingman's A-10 still carried a full load of 30mm ammunition, plus 2 Maverick missiles, enough firepower to maintain suppression, while the medical helicopter completed its extraction. "Morrison, I need you to take over harassment duties," she transmitted. "I've got about 3 minutes of fuel before I have to climb away from this engagement." "Roger that, Storm. I'm rolling in on the Eastern Ridge line now." But as Morrison began his attack run, Storm's threat warning system detected a new problem. Her radar warning receiver was painting multiple aircraft contacts approaching from the northwest, Pakistani F-16 fighters that had presumably been scrambled to investigate the American air activity near the border region. The Pakistani Air Force maintained an uneasy relationship with American forces operating in Afghanistan. While officially cooperative, their pilots had standing orders to intercept any American aircraft that appeared to be operating in Pakistani airspace. Storm's aggressive maneuvering during the canyon run had taken her aircraft within miles of the international border, close enough to trigger a diplomatic incident that could escalate far beyond the tactical situation in the Korangal Valley. "All stations, this is Storm. We've got Pakistani F-16s inbound from the northwest. Recommend immediate extraction and withdrawal to avoid international incident." The medical helicopter pilot's response was immediate and professional. "Negative, Storm. TORS is loaded and we're lifting off now. Give us 2 more minutes to clear the valley floor." 2 minutes that Storm didn't have, with Pakistani interceptors closing at Mach 1.2 and fuel gauges approaching critical levels. As she watched the Black Hawk struggle into the thin mountain air with its precious cargo, she realized that the most dangerous phase of the entire engagement was just beginning. The Pakistani F-16s appeared on Storm's radar display like deadly angels of international diplomacy, their electronic signatures marking them as Block 52 aircraft armed with AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, capable of engaging targets at ranges exceeding 60 miles. The lead fighter was already illuminating her A-10 with targeting radar, a clear signal that the Pakistani pilot was prepared to engage if he perceived a threat to his nation's sovereignty. Pakistani fighter, this is United States Air Force Major Alvarez, she transmitted on the international emergency frequency. We are conducting emergency medical evacuation of wounded American personnel. Request clearance to continue operations. The response came back in accented but precise English. American aircraft, you are operating in proximity to Pakistani airspace without authorization. Alter course to heading 270 immediately or face immediate interception. Storm's fuel gauge indicated 12 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption rates. The medical helicopter below was still climbing away from the valley floor with tours aboard, but the Black Hawk's maximum altitude and speed were far below what would be needed to avoid Pakistani interceptors if the situation escalated to active engagement. Morrison, we need to provide escort for Dustoff 73 until they clear Pakistani intercept range, she transmitted to her wingman. Can you maintain station? Negative, Storm. I'm showing fuel state that requires immediate recovery to Bagram. I can give you maybe 5 more minutes before I have to depart. 5 minutes to shepherd a medical helicopter carrying a critically wounded American soldier past Pakistani interceptors, Taliban ground forces, and the unforgiving geography of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The tactical situation had evolved from complex to nearly impossible, but Storm had learned from her grandfather that nearly impossible was just another way of saying challenging. Pakistani fighter, be advised we are evacuating critically wounded American personnel, she transmitted again. Medical aircraft requires safe passage through international airspace. This time the Pakistani pilot's response carried a different tone. American pilot, I have observed your operations in the valley below. Your aircraft performed impressively in difficult terrain. We will provide escort until your medical aircraft clears the border region. It was a remarkable moment of international cooperation, emerging from what could have become a serious diplomatic incident. The Pakistani F-16 pilot had watched Storm's canyon run and recognized professional competence when he saw it, regardless of national allegiances or political considerations. Pakistani fighter, I appreciate the professional courtesy. Dustoff 73 will be clear of the border region in approximately 8 minutes. Understood, American pilot. We will maintain escort formation. What followed was a surreal procession through Afghan airspace. 2 American A-10s, a Pakistani F-16, and a medical evacuation helicopter carrying a wounded SEAL toward definitive medical care. The radio frequencies carried the professional chatter of military aviators from 2 different nations, working together to ensure that Sergeant Torres would survive his injuries. But the most remarkable moment came as Storm's fuel state finally forced her to climb toward recovery altitude. The Pakistani F-16 pilot came up on the emergency frequency one final time. American pilot, my name is Squadron Leader Rashid Ahmad. Your flying in that canyon was unlike anything I have observed in 20 years of military aviation. I will remember this engagement. Copy that, Squadron Leader Ahmad. Professional courtesy is appreciated. As Storm turned her A-10 toward Bagram Air Base, she could see the medical helicopter disappearing into the distance, carrying Tors toward the surgical team that would save his life. Below, Morrison was making his final gun runs against Taliban positions, ensuring that Reeves and his remaining team members could be extracted by conventional helicopter operations. The engagement in the Korangal Valley was ending, but its implications would resonate throughout the military aviation community for years to come. Storm had demonstrated that tactical innovation could overcome seemingly impossible odds, that individual skill could triumph over superior numbers, and that the bond between American service members transcended the boundaries of service branches or combat specialties. But as she flew through the thin mountain air toward Bagram, Major Kestrel Alvarez had no idea that her canyon run would become the stuff of military legend, studied in flight schools and tactical academies, dissected by aviation historians and combat veterans who understood that some moments in warfare transcend their immediate tactical significance. The after-action reports would focus on ammunition expenditure rates, fuel consumption, and tactical communications procedures. They would miss the human element, the moment when a pilot named Storm decided that 16 American lives were worth risking her own, regardless of canyon walls, enemy fire, or international boundaries. As her A-10 touched down at Bagram Air Base 47 minutes after takeoff, Storm had no way of knowing that she had just authored one of the most remarkable single-aircraft combat missions in the history of military aviation. The canyon that the SEALs had said was too narrow had become her pathway to a different kind of immortality, the kind reserved for warriors who refuse to accept that something cannot be done. The debrief session at Bagram Air Base began 3 hours after Storm's aircraft touched down, conducted in a sterile conference room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and burned coffee. Colonel Webb presided over the gathering with the methodical precision of an officer who'd survived 23 years of military bureaucracy, but his usual stern demeanor carried undertones of something approaching awe. "Major Alvarez, let's start with your decision to ignore my direct order to abort the canyon run," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command authority. Around the table sat representatives from multiple agencies, Air Force intelligence officers, SEAL team liaisons, and a Pakistani Air Force colonel who'd flown in specifically to discuss the international aspects of the engagement. Storm kept her response professional and concise. "Sir, my assessment of the tactical situation indicated that the trapped personnel would not survive long enough for alternative extraction methods. The canyon approach, while high risk, offered the only viable option for immediate close air support." What she didn't mention was the voice in her head during those crucial seconds, her grandfather's weathered hands on aircraft controls, teaching her that sometimes the book was wrong and instinct was right. Military debrief sessions weren't the appropriate forum for discussing family influences on tactical decision-making. "Major, your aircraft's flight data recorder shows G-forces and bank angles that exceeded manufacturer specifications," interjected Captain Jennifer Walsh from Aircraft Maintenance. "We're going to need a complete structural inspection before that bird flies again." "Copy that, Captain. The aircraft performed within acceptable parameters for the mission profile." Colonel Ahmed from the Pakistani Air Force leaned forward, his English precise and thoughtful. "Major Alvarez, I observed your canyon approach from altitude. My question is not about your decision-making process, but about your preparation. How does one train for such an operation?" The question struck at the heart of something Storm had been thinking about during the flight back to Bagram. How do you train for threading a granite needle at 400 knots? How do you prepare for tactical situations that exist outside the parameters of normal military operations? "Sir, I grew up flying agricultural aircraft in confined terrain. My grandfather taught me that aircraft capabilities are often limited more by pilot imagination than by engineering specifications." "Interesting," Ahmed replied. "In our Air Force, we call such pilots mountain hawks, those who can make aircraft perform beyond their designed limitations when circumstances require it. The